Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock, so we are going to get started. I hope you all are making it through the snow of the last 36 hours, and thank you for being here today. We are excited to have you all here for the second webinar in this three-part webinar series happening as part of New Hampshire Flood Safety Awareness Week. This webinar series was created and brought to you by the New Hampshire Silver Jackets, and we will highlight our New Hampshire Flood Hazard Handbook, which was a guide that was created by the New Hampshire Silver Jackets team for local municipal officials. So let's get started today by just reviewing some housekeeping items quickly before we get into it. So first, my name is Katie Pate, and I'm the Floodplain Management Program Coordinator within the New Hampshire Office of Planning and Development. You'll be hearing my voice frequently as we go throughout this webinar series. This webinar series is being recorded and will be posted on the New Hampshire Office of Planning and Development's YouTube page. Cameras and microphones are turned off for all attendees. And there will be time at the end for question and answer, at which attendees will be able to unmute themselves and ask any questions. But please also note that the chat feature is available throughout the webinar, so you can ask any questions or comments throughout in that form as well. If you do have any technical issues throughout this webinar, please send a message in the chat and someone will be able to assist you as soon as possible. So in case not everyone is aware, this is the second webinar of 3 in this series. The first webinar that was covering the topic of before the flood was originally scheduled for yesterday, but we did reschedule it to this Friday, March 17th at noon due to the nor'easter yesterday. If you already registered for that webinar, you can simply join using the same link that you received in your email. If you still need to register for that webinar, however, I'll be sure to put the link in the chat in just a few minutes so you're able to register. Now, today's webinar will cover the topic of during the flood and provide information for local officials to keep their community informed during a flooding event and learn state emergency operation procedures. The next webinar, the third one, quote unquote, will be held tomorrow, also at 10 a.m. and will cover the topic of after the flood. Again, you will need to register for each of these webinars separately. And so the link for today's webinar will not work for tomorrow and also won't work for that rescheduled one for Friday. You'll need to register for those separately as well. And I'll make sure that all the links for both tomorrow and Friday, again, are in the chat in just a few minutes. So if you haven't registered, you are able to if you want to join. So the New Hampshire Silver Jackets is a state-led team that was formed in 2015 and brings together state and federal agencies to focus on flood risk management issues that affect local communities. Our team includes representatives from over 15 agencies and programs, and you can tell by all the logos on the screen. You can learn more about the New Hampshire Silver Jackets by viewing our website, again noted on the screen, but I'll also include our website link in the team's chat in just a few minutes as well in case you want to visit it. So here's an overview of our agenda for today. First, we'll briefly cover the New Hampshire Flood Hazard Handbook, including what it is and where you can find it. Next, we'll move on to a series of presentations from the New Hampshire Department of Transportation and New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And then again, at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A as well for any questions or comments, et cetera, there may be. So let's kick off with a poll question real quick. Let me get it launched here. Hopefully it will pop up on everybody's screen in just a minute. Hopefully now it has popped up. So the poll question is, have you seen or are you aware of the New Hampshire Flood Hazard Handbook? So there's 3 answers. The first is I'm familiar with it and knew of it prior to this webinar series. Second answer is I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with it. Or third answer is what handbook? I've never heard of it before. So please, if you don't mind answering that. There's no wrong answers. This is obviously a learning area, or a learning space. So we're just looking for some feedback before we jump into it. Okay, we'll leave that open for just another minute to make sure everybody is able to give their answer. Okay. One more minute. I see we have a couple responses popping back in. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to close the poll. Done. Close poll. So it looks like the majority of attendees here today, you're familiar with it and you knew of it prior to this webinar series. So that is great. We love to hear that. It means you hopefully have utilized it at some point and since it's been released. And then some of you have heard of it, but you're not familiar with it. So this is also a great opportunity for you to become more familiar with it and hopefully implement it, moving forward from here. So now to talk a little more about the Flood Hazard Handbook. So in 2019, the New Hampshire Silver Jackets released the Flood Hazard Handbook for municipal officials. This publication is designed to help New Hampshire communities prepare for, respond to, and recover from floods. It includes guidance, best practices, and information about available federal and state resources organized into situation-specific sections. Those sections are before the flood, during the flood, and after the flood. That might sound familiar because this webinar series was designed to highlight those 3 sections of the handbook. So hopefully you will learn more about what's in the handbook and what happens in those sections in this webinar series this week. So also included in the Flood Hazard Handbook is a customizable flood response and recovery checklist that can be used by municipal officials to identify and manage priority activities when a flood does happen. The Flood Hazard Handbook is available online in PDF form. It's also in print for community officials. So if you'd like a physical hard copy of the handbook, please let us know, as we do have some copies available and we are looking to distribute those to communities within New Hampshire. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to the New Hampshire Department of Transportation for our first presentation today.
Hey, thank you, Katie, and good morning, all. Looks like Mother Nature seems to be sending us a message for Flood Awareness Week because all this snow is going to melt and rain's on the way. But this talk will share some similarities and some differences between the DOT, New Hampshire DOT, and Public Works Division, mainly with respect to the emergency support functions. But as we know, this is a day about during the flood, and I have a brief story I'd like to tell you about, a retrospect. But at the DOT, we do have a transportation management center, which has forecasting ability mainly for checking the condition of roads and for verifying what the weather reports are saying, but also a series of sensors and webcams and largely the organization is systems engineering, systems incident management. Let's see. I think I want to get this into. I'm gonna go. This is probably going to work better, I think, if we just use this screen. So the flood hazard story is I think many of you are familiar with the Mother's Day and the Patriots' Day storms from about 15 years ago. There was an enormous amount of damage across the state, but because a lot of that was on state roads and just the sheer amount of it, some of the back roads didn't really get as well documented, and at least not at the state level. And even some of my own personal records, which I thought I had documented this area pretty well, turns out they're hard to find. So what we're looking at here is on the left is a overtopping of a road in a watershed near my house. This is actually much further up in the watershed than the actual crossings.
Hey, Tim.
Yes.
I think you need to advance the screen. We can only see the initial screen of the PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. I guess all right. I think I'm going to go back here and just use this.
That's better.
Alrighty. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about right now. Are a couple of culverts that are in the vicinity of my house and experienced a lot of damage during the Mother's Day storm. Uh, yeah, this is known as Back Creek. So let me give you just go ahead one screen here and give you a little bit of an overview. Very difficult to see the detail, but you can tell the blue is Back Creek, and essentially I live in the middle, and there's a crossing off to the northwest here, higher up in the watershed, and then there's a larger crossing downstream. So this is in Deerfield and Nottingham. It's actually the old stagecoach road from the seacoast. Was well traveled before the railroad was built, and so the road has a lot of history, but it's also um, the drainage from has been upgraded obviously in recent years. So the photo on the left is trying to show you a situation of overtopping within the watershed, and we have, but not exactly at this crossing. On the right, this is the lower part of Back Creek, where the road had washed out. The road actually had washed out on both of these crossings, and so at the time I was working in Boston, and so I was up early for a commute, and and I got down to that lower crossing, and the flow over the water was it was over a foot. It was 100 feet long. It was just what they tell you not to drive through. And rain was pretty intense, but my judgment might have been a little bit flawed back then, in those days when I was motivated by paychecks and young, a little stupid. So I decided I was going to drive over it, and luckily did make it across. I think it's more credit to front wheel drive and high torque, maybe even a little bit of experience crashing through the waves in skiffs as a kid, because it was a little dicey, but I did make it, and I made it to work. And I remember when I got to work, the rain was so intense that looking out the window, there was a rooster tail of flow coming off down the downspouts and off the roof of the adjacent building, and many of the catch basins were actually surging. Water was flowing out of the ground onto the road. I think some of you will remember those types of storms. But we so when I left work and headed home, obviously emergency responders were out, and a lot of detours, and it was more of an education in what goes on with emergency response and how difficult it is to travel during floods. But I was expecting to just drive home, but when I got home, there was no road to drive on, and my wife had not left the house. She's a little smarter than me sometimes. So we had a car on what I'm going to call an island, because the road washed out on both sides here. And that's really I'm trying to relate this as almost like a case study, because we have now we have brand new structures at both of these locations, and they're large, they're bridge structures. But prior to that time, it was difficult to during storms and frequent overtoppings and some undersized structures. So here we are again. I'm trapped again, but for a different reason. We got the snow's cleared. Beautiful day out there now. But what I want to do is talk to you a bit about the DOT and Public Works emergency support functions, specifically, really in the context of the whole framework of preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation, because you wouldn't have if you just thought about it in terms of response, that wouldn't capture it. We have a transportation lead for emergency support function 1, and that is really a mission to keep the roads open where needed, as well as some other things which I'll go into. But whereas the emergency support function 3 is Public Works, and that's largely buildings, facilities that support buildings, and involves administration of consultants within this one Public Works division. Whereas those that might be familiar with DOT know that we have multiple bureaus, and bridge design, construction, highway design. Though they all of that is kind of done for the buildings and facilities within the Public Works division. That's how it works. So with preparation and planning, we have emergency, the Emergency Operations Center and levels of activation, which Vanessa is going to go into in more detail. But that is the trigger, or the trigger rather, comes from Homeland Security for both of these emergency support functions, even though DOT and Public Works are the leads. And we're knowledgeable about past flood events. Our shed crews have a good deal of knowledge about where they expect the floods to happen, and we communicate. We have documentation about evacuation routes, as do the towns, but it's really the whole transportation network in itself. And certainly, the sky isn't falling in the response in this whole. It sometimes seems like that when you're in the middle of social media and everything is sensationalized, but we take the whole reason that this planning and Web EOC and this incident management is here is to avoid this kind of communication pitfall. So emergency support function 1, the transportation in annex is it's coordination and cooperation across state agencies prior to, during, and after the flood disaster or emergency. And it's a management of resources and recognition during the event of where the support is needed. There is an annual planning component, which we review the actual document and include sufficient training for any new employees or changes that have taken place, maintaining the points of contact, and inventorying the transportation resources available. But as we all know, disasters are local, and during a flood, there needs to be insurance that there's a what resources are committed, what are uncommitted, and that there has to be a uniform command structure through the standard operating procedures and each of these incidents. This is very important to in the overall coordination at the state level or within the DOT, all the trucks and but exceptions to the jurisdiction would be the military or federal, but also the local emergency vehicles. So we're kind of in the middle of that framework. And Weber EOC is what helps us do that, on the incident management side. The reports need to be sufficiently detailed, both across all of the agencies, to maintain financial records and logs, really, of what happened. A couple decades ago, it wasn't nearly as well organized as we've been able to do in recent years with all the technologies. But it's still a challenge, and it's still going to be difficult. We haven't been tested, I don't think, like a lot of other states in recent years. We've escaped a lot of bullets. Now, so contrasting with ESF1 with ESF3, the public works and engineering is also activated by Homeland Security Emergency Management, but this is a coordination of engineering and administrative duties, but with all of the networks that are already kind of established, and maybe some new ones, but largely Public Works is working with consultants and procuring equipment, helping to restore utilities, and then post disaster, also with consultants trying to evaluate the safety of the buildings and the systems. But this is really an administrative function where they are during an event, they're trying to get consultants available for their expertise rather than directly providing that expertise. I hope you are aware of the Municipal Response and Recovery, or I'm sorry, the New Hampshire Public Works Mutual Aid Program. This is being updated this year again, and I would encourage you to join in this and go ahead and send an email to T2. This is T2.center@unh.edu. They, for the membership at $25 a year, you really get a fair amount of information, and it's an excellent way for communities to be communicating through this program. So I'd recommend you check in with them later this year, if you haven't already. So yeah, so from DOT's perspective, it's a monitoring and reaction, but a coordination of not only evacuation routes, but really maintaining transportation routes to needed facilities, shelters, which are typically schools, or reception areas or staging areas or any other area that is, needs access. And, that's the primary response we have during a storm. But there is a debris management program, and, there's a plan, and DOT leads that. And similar to the communication chain for the ESFs, there's standing operating procedures and directives, and there's other supporting agencies that have, based on their mission and their um, expertise, they're involved in debris management as well. And the emphasis is really to set the priorities and to to be able to do environmentally as well as logistically handle the debris. So, kind of capping off the process is mitigation and long-term recovery, public works, capital improvement projects, as well as DOT betterment projects and project development work, those larger projects to rebuild after floods. And a lot of these do make good case studies. I think we can, we can look back in retrospect, even prior to Irene, where Silver Jackets kind of grew out of, and understand based on what's out there, what has happened. And a lot of this isn't really necessarily that sexy. It goes on under the roads, the culvert rehabs, but it all kind of fits into the picture in related to response. The response many times goes on for years. Now that's really all I had to share, although happy to answer some questions at the end. And if Vanessa is ready, I think I'd like to swing it, keep this moving right along and send it over to her.
Sounds great. Thank you, Tim. I will take control now of the presentation. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Vanessa Plangy. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for the New Hampshire Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we have response to flooding, and this kind of works with storms in general. We are actually currently at a partial activation at the State Emergency Operations Center. So I'm kind of doing double duty here. I might have to step away at some point, but hopefully I can make it through this without having any sort of incidents happen. As Katie had introduced us, we're talking about during the storm and kind of our response plans. For us, all disasters are local. They begin local and they end local. This means that the local community is essentially in control of disasters when it comes to response and any sort of help that they may need during an incident. So that incident occurs, they're going to be the first people on scene. They're going to be the last people on scene. We have the phases of emergency management here to the right. Typically, there are 4 phases: the preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. We also include prevention in there. So when an incident happens, that's right after, the preparedness, and you go into response mode. What happens is the recovery actually starts before the response is over to the incident. Think of it in, the act of, when we talk about flooding, if there's flooding on the seacoast and the seawall is kind of being toppled over, as happened back in December from those waves coming from the ocean, the Department of Transportation is going to be there trying to clear off the roads before, and so that's kind of moving into the recovery phase before everything happens. One of the things we talk about is make sure that you're following your plan. So have a plan for everything. Make sure that your community has its emergency plans in order and practice these plans. Hazard mitigation plans should be updated every 5 years. That's what we recommend at the state level. And then your response actions should be in that plan according to the type of incident. So you should have response plans for flooding within that emergency operations plan. When we are in response mode, we typically do 12-hour operational periods. I believe that's how most emergency operations centers activate and operate. And then we also hold regular briefings. For example, if we are activated when we have a new shift come on, we will make sure that we brief out to them so that they are aware of what's going on. We set up objectives so that for the next operational period, so that we know what we are working toward, what our goal is, so that we can make sure that we are meeting the needs of local communities as well as our state and federal partners. When it comes to flooding, there are various concerns within the state. We have things like coastal flooding, inland flooding, ice jams, and dam breaches are some of the major ones. Because of this, flooding is really the number one natural hazard within the state because we have so many different types of flooding that could happen. And we've seen it where they happen all at once. We've seen where we just have inland flooding going on. For example, back in 2021, the Cheshire County and Sullivan counties were really hit hard with some of that inland flooding going on when we had the rains in July and very early August. So like I said, we end up with all kinds of different flooding. And in those examples, both of those floods ended up getting declared as disasters, federal disasters. Tim talked a little bit about our Emergency Operations Center activations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So we have 4 levels of activations. Steady state is our blue sky day. That's our regular day-to-day. Then we have enhanced monitoring. That is essentially just people from our division, Homeland Security and Emergency Management, that are kind of keeping an eye on something that may be going on. It could be, we suspect that there could be some flooding happening, but we typically do this more with events such as like elections or something that's more of a planned event. Partial activation, this is usually our most common level of activation. We do full activations depending on the severity of the incident. We had a full activation for COVID, for example. That was a 16-month full activation. But most of the time, you're going to see us in a partial activation for something such as flooding. This takes a little bit of a look at how our Emergency Operations Center is organized. As Tim mentioned, we have emergency support functions, and so somebody like the Department of Transportation would be the lead on emergency support function number 1 and emergency support function number 3. The great thing about this, so we have their EOC manager, which kind of handles everything and manages, and then I fall under ESF 15, which is Emergency Support Function 15, which is public information and legal. And legal also is based, so I come directly off of the SEOC manager, and the legal also comes directly off of the SEOC manager. Then you have, your logistics chief, your operations chief, your planning chief, and your finance and business chief. And then it kind of structures on down. And during an emergency, this is how we structure ourselves according to the incident command system. And this is something that's common throughout the United States. It's the National Incident Management System, NIMS. So we follow this structure. If there were to be a flood, this is the kind of organizational structure that we would do. And we would go into any sort of response mode following this structure and bring in different emergency support functions depending on how large the event is. So if there were to be a massive amount of flooding, we could bring in more emergency support functions according to the need of that event. And just to look at these emergency support functions, so we have 1 through 18. The great thing about these is these are the same throughout the United States. So if you were to go to an emergency operations center throughout the United States, whether it be a local one, a state one, or a county level, as a lot of other states are organized at a county level, you would be able to represent the same emergency support function and understand what those needs and the responses were according to those functions. One thing that I can say, I talked about like the responses starting local and ending local, and the needs of the local communities. I'll give another example from that 2021 flooding incidents. We had a town who needed Jersey barriers because a bunch of their roads were washed out, but they couldn't get them through mutual aid, which is usually how they start out. They request through mutual aid to get some sort of resource, whether it be a person or whether it be something like Jersey barriers, which is a physical item. And then what they will do is they will then reach out to us at the state level if they can't find it through mutual aid. And in that instance, they couldn't get anything through mutual aid because all the other towns surrounding them were using their Jersey barriers to block off their own roads. So they'll reach out to us here at the state level at the Emergency Operations Center. And then if we don't have that resource available, we can either reach out to other communities outside of that mutual aid, or we can also use the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which is a federal level compact, and we can request resources from other areas. One example I'll give you, Hurricane Ian down in Florida, obviously they experienced horrible flooding down there when that happened, and they used that Emergency Management Assistance Compact to request volunteers, to request extra public information officers, basically any sort of person resource that they needed, but you can also certainly request any sort of physical resource as well. We also have an online-based software called WebEOC. This software allows for local communities to go in and request those resources that I was talking about. We have several boards that would particularly be used if there were flooding to happen. So Tim talked a little bit about evacuation routes, and if you needed something to get someone to shelters, such as bus transportation or something like that. So we do have a shelters board where local communities can put in if they have a shelter. So if someone needed to evacuate their home, they would know where they could go if they were to call 211. 211 keeps an eye on that board and would let people know where they can go for assistance. We also have a road closure board that is usually accessed by the Department of Transportation through their Transportation Management Center, as well as local communities, and they can put in road closures there so we can kind of keep an eye on different routes and how traffic is flowing. We also have a local emergency operations center activation list, so local communities can go in there and enter in what sort of activation they have going on, so we can monitor what sort of help they may need, and we will check in with them frequently if they are activated to make sure that we are meeting those needs and resources that they need. And then also they can put in mission requests as well. So when I give that example of the Jersey barrier, they can go in there and enter in that they need a Jersey barrier from someone. And then that mission request is assigned to somebody here at the State Emergency Operations Center in order to get that task fulfilled. We do offer training in regards to this for local officials. Usually it's the emergency management directors in town. All towns within New Hampshire have an emergency management director. So those are usually the people that are trained up on using WebEOC. Another thing I wanted to talk about, especially since I am the public information officer, is having messaging plans for during some sort of flooding event. So we have what's called the planning P that we use for our operation cycles. I mentioned that usually those are 12-hour operational cycles. And then we also have an 8-step communication model that follows that planning P. And as you can see here, it kind of goes around in a circle and then you circle right back. So you're going to be looking at the types of messages that you want to set out. You're going to set the communication goals. So those will be aligned with the objectives that are set for that operational period. And then you're going to go ahead and put out your messages, develop them, and then you're also going to evaluate those and change them up if need be. This is something that's very important, especially during an event when the event is happening. That way you can get your message out to people. Some of the types of messages that we would recommend are things like staying informed, getting to higher ground, obeying activation orders. Turn around, don't drown is a big one for us. We like little catchphrases that are easy for people to remember. Every single time there's flooding, we constantly see people driving through floodwaters. It is a common event. We really try to push that messaging hard because when people are driving through floodwaters, first of all, they don't know what's underneath that road. They don't know if the road's washed out. They don't know if there's something upstream that could be coming across that road and pushing the vehicle across, push the vehicle into active rivers if that were, downstream, if there were something that were to break up higher stream. And then the other thing is, if you do get in your car into the water and something happens and you're stuck, you're then putting first responders also in danger in order to come and rescue you. So there's several reasons why we really push messaging surrounding that. Electrical safety is another one, and then avoiding the flood waters in general, which kind of goes around with the turnaround, don't drown. It only takes 6 inches of fast moving water to knock a person off their feet, and 1 foot can sweep a vehicle away. We also tell people that afterward, there could be risks of contamination. So you really just want to avoid that flood water. And one of the other things we talk about with our messaging is also to keep it simple and clear. Typically during a blue sky day, we might say that our messaging is around a 5th grade level. If you are in the middle of some sort of response action, you actually want to dumb it down to about a 2nd grade level, because people are panicking. They're having, they're having to make split decisions. So you want to make sure that they are following your messaging, and you want to keep it simple. Another aspect that we do is we listen to social media. Sometimes this can help determine what messaging needs to be. One of the things that has been very common recently is people moving barriers to roads, or cones, whether it be cones or other Jersey barriers. Actually, we've seen this too, blocking off flooded areas, people moving them and driving through. So we've been hammering this messaging in more recent times, but that's something that we learned through listening to social media. Also helps you identify trends and problems, and helps you figure out what's missing within your messaging. We do offer EMD templates when it comes to flooding. We have these on our HSEM Resource Center. They include press releases, graphics, customizable graphics, and talking points. I will throw that link in the chat a little bit later in case anybody wants to take a look at those. Another thing that we recommend is understanding the language when it comes to watches and warnings and any sort of messaging that may be coming from the National Weather Center, to also align your messaging with it. So you have things such as flash flood warning, flood warning. Flash flood warning typically would be, and Sarah may correct me as I know I saw her on here, if you have some sort of dam failure and the flood is imminent. We have flood advisories, flood watches. So the difference between a watch and a warning is a watch means that it is possible and you need to be prepared. A warning means to take action. You need to get to higher ground immediately. In regards to messaging, so there's several different ways that we tell people to pay attention. One of those could be through your local alerts, whether it be a code red. We have the statewide NH alerts. Social media is always a great place. Facebook and Nextdoor are two of the big ones, but we have Twitter as well as Instagram, local listservs. And then what if you were to have no access to power? What if you were to have no access to the internet? Another great place to kind of put out any sort of messaging, is your town hall or the dump. Dumps are popular places in New Hampshire, or the waste stations. Those are good places where you're going to be able to reach people quickly if you need to reach them with some sort of paper message. We also really recommend to people that you consider people who have access and functional needs. These are people who could speak English as a second language, know what languages are spoken commonly in your community, signing up for local police and fire notifications. A lot of local police, fire, dispatch will offer a list that you can sign up for if you have somebody in your house that has some sort of special need, whether it be if they have autism and you need them to respond to the house without the sirens on, or if they have mobility issues and they're going to need help evacuating from their home. There's also 911 Cares. 911 Cares is handled here at the state level, and that's great because it ties it to a specific phone number as well as an address. So you can put in a phone number, and if something comes from that phone number, whether it be that specific person that's calling or somebody else, they will understand immediately that there's something going on. And I just listed some of the things that they do: dementia, whether somebody could be violent, deaf, cognitive disability, mobile issues, or somebody who's nonverbal. The other thing that we recommend is that people take the free trainings that FEMA independent study courses offer, as well as we host courses throughout the state. A lot of these can teach you things about the incident command system that's used to respond to events such as flooding. There's also things such as volunteer coordination courses, a whole slew of courses that you can take that will allow you to better understand how to respond to an incident. And so now we are up to the questions. I don't know if you want to take back over, Katie?
Sure. Thank you, Vanessa, Tim. Thank you so much for presenting, taking time out of your schedule to be here. At this point, we're available to ask any questions to them. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand feature in Teams, or you can put it in the chat. And if you use the raise hand, I'll be able to let you unmute yourself so you can ask that verbally. If not, feel free to put it in the chat. Yes, Sarah Jameson just put in the chat that she enjoyed it, and she will be presenting on Friday at our webinar, the Before the Flood. She's from the National Weather Service, so you don't want to miss that. Okay, not seeing any. Go ahead, please.
One other thing, Katie, in that part of the response is the ability to work remotely. That's very helpful for keeping a lot of the department employees off the road and still productive. And obviously not the operations people that have been working all night, but some of the rest of us are not. We don't have to get in the way, and that's definitely a long-term improvement in the response to these disasters.
Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands or any other questions in the chat. So I guess that means you just all talked so well that there's no questions. So we'll just wrap up then. Oh, Vanessa, do you mind just advancing to the final slide? Great. So there's no questions. If you do have a follow-up question or something you think of, like, 10 minutes from now or 2-3 hours from now, feel free to email me. My email's on the screen. Even if it's for Vanessa or Tim, I'm more than happy to then forward you to the correct person to answer that question. Make sure you get that answer. So feel free to do that. Again, this recording will be posted once all the webinars have been had. They will be put on the Office of Planning and Development's YouTube page. We will also be posting the slides and making those available as well for everyone to review. Again, be sure to register for part 3 happening tomorrow and our rescheduled part 1 happening on Friday. The link is in the chat. I will be sure to put it in once again before I leave this webinar. So if you want to hold on a second afterwards, if you don't see it, I'll make sure you'll be able to grab that. Again, please check out the Flood Hazard Handbook if you haven't already. It's available online. It's a great resource to download, save it to your desktop, save it somewhere where you know where it would be to be able to access it easily. Again, we have multiple printed copies available. So if you would like a hard copy version, please let us know and we'll find a way to get that to you as well, because they're meant for, we printed them for communities to have, so they're literally meant for you all. And then again, thank you for being here. Real quick before we close, I'm just going to finalize with one final poll. It's just asking you guys to rate the webinar today. These polls really help us improve our trainings in the future or any future trainings we may have. So we do appreciate the feedback. So if you don't mind answering the webinar poll, and then, okay, great. I see somebody has asked for a copy, so I'll make sure that is connected to you at some point in the future. So please, rate the webinar, and then that's all we have today. So thank you so much. Giving people a few more minutes to submit before I close it. So.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to close the poll. That's it. Thank you guys. Have a good afternoon. Well, yes, it's still morning. Good morning and good afternoon, and we'll see you all later.